pretty sure I got enough.
Tell me when you're ready.
Yeah. When you're ready.
Alright, so this is Ben Yosef Yaconon, understanding the African philosophical concept behind the diagram of the law of the opposites. So Ben Yosef Yaconon is one of the most important writers for Africans worldwide. He broke down the system of that Bible and its perspective on white supremacy. He had 16,000 books and papyri in his apartment. He could speak several languages, and he really was one of the people that created African American and African studies in America, so that the people that had been enslaved could know that Christianity was a brainwashing system. I say to everybody, I've got all of his books. He was a phenomenal intellect and scholar and academic, and he was at the forefront because he read so much, and he gave his life to waking. He was like the first woke black man, not the first really, but he shared what the pyramids were about, the hieroglyphics. He was self-taught, and he moved the nation of the Moors, the African in America. I say to everybody, read it so you can understand how stupid the perspective European elites have used that Bible. He understands the Masons, he understands the Rosicrucians, he knows what the real Masonic, Mass and Sonic, is all about. And I say to everybody, read Ben Yosef Yaconon. He's the man. And every African American is starting to wake up to what this man and John Henrik Clarke have created. So for me, it's a libation to this man. That's it.
When you're ready.
So Noam Chomsky is, this particular book is Noam Chomsky and Andrei Vlachek on Western terrorism from Hiroshima to drone warfare. And it's just a dialogue, but Chomsky's written over 100 books. He's MIT professor in linguistics. I haven't read any of his books on linguistics. I've only read this one, and I've watched a whole bunch of lectures. But Chomsky is blacklisted. I should say whitelisted, blacklisted from television, because fossil fuel companies and corporations don't want him waking people up. So he doesn't get interviewed on Fox, he doesn't get interviewed on Channel 9, 7, 10, SBS, ABC. They keep him out because he's a real scholar. He used to debate a lot on TV, but people started to be awake. So Amy Goodman at Democracy Now! Calls him a lion of academia, because he just reads, and then shares it. He's still going. He'll die soon. He's old. But he goes to universities. He's always got time for people. He's got a reputation for sharing that knowledge to free people. So that's Noam Chomsky. Or a day at union, helping them. To them, it's what can I get out of them in the guise of being charitable. So it looks like on the front again, he's the perfect example of this Christianity. It looks on the front again like he's here to help people and assist and do the good Lord like Jesus' work. But in actual fact, what he's doing is he's looking at people as a resource. He's looking at people as an object, and the way so as long as he, or the lack of equipment that he's got, or the broken equipment, or how poorly planned it is, but as long as he's getting his money, everything's working. So if I have a conversation with him, it's just a horrible conversation, because who he is about people is, I'm going to get what I need to get out of them in order to get rich and control them. And who I am is, they're here and they walk away with a skill set. He doesn't do that with people. So people are basically just his paid slave. He doesn't give a fuck about their emotionality, their mentality, the physical stress of the job, his foundational work or integrity for the business is really, it's cruel at times. And the more I watch him, the more I think, this guy's a fucking arsehole. For example, the dishwasher that at some point they just watching, and I'm like, I went over there just to see what it was like. I thought, I put my thing just to see how it goes, and then I was like, I'm not working over here again. But he doesn't solve the problem. He just thinks, I'll get someone else until they snap, or I'll keep pushing them to do things, and it's just a cruel way of being. And then we had a staff party, and his wife was making these digs at me because they're listening to me in a microphone, right? And I say all this shit. And his wife's making this dig at me like, oh, he's such a great leader. And I'm like, he's got a microphone. He's spies on us. Hide behind outside the window. Or hide. And I said to him, like in my meditation, I said to Anastasia, I said, why have you sent me? What is my purpose? It's horrible. And she said, listen, it's in a dream. Like I go into sort of meditate, like 3 in the morning I wake up sometimes, I'm halfway through the dream. Having this conversation, I don't know if it's a conversation with my unconscious mind, but I'm like, why have you sent me in? And she's like, you need to understand what fascism is. You need to know what this is, how they work, the elements of you that are like them, and what you're up against. So yeah, I just, and then like he's really sneaky, like, let's say we've got this guy's 48, he's fucking lazy, and he keeps telling the boss that I'm really tired, and my body really feels it, but he can go do a 19-hole playing golf, or teach tennis, or he's got his own business cleaning cars. He's not tired then. So yeah, I'm just watching and learning, but now I'm sort of at this point where I just want to leave and get away from this guy, because I'm learning from him, but I can't teach him anything. Does all this stuff, and the people that he isn't trained, he just tells them what to do. So yeah, I've sort of got this insight, but I'm looking for another job. Brand new, opened out, and it looked really good. I don't know if it's what you were wanting, but it was on Marketplace. $100 video camera with 4 gigs, I think, something like that.
Sounds good, yeah.
Marketplace is awesome.
Yeah, I know. Have you got cameras and stuff yourself, or?
No, I think Em's got a camera, a good one. She doesn't use it. She buys all this fucking shit. She's a bit of a hoarder. Doesn't use it. But I don't know what to say. It's a Nokia. Do you need one?
Sure, I'll go.
I mean,
I'll have a look at the Marketplace and all that jazz, yeah.
Alright, so this is a secret country, and it's by John Pilger, who's an investigative journalist. I think John is one of the John Browns, based in Django, and John Brown slaves. So John Pilger is like today's John Brown. He's willing to say what needs to be said in order to free humanity from this caste, class, white supremacist system. And A Secret Country is about what has happened, the massacres, the killings, the batterings that the First Nations here have been victims of. And he really breaks down the system of what's been going on for the last 250 years. Australia, or the corporations' supreme immoral colonial policy. That is, to the Martin Luther King said, the ultimate logic of genocide. The ultimate logic of racism is genocide. And of course, we know that racism is purely emotional and fear-based. So it's the ultimate illogic, is what I would say. John has also done a number of films and documentaries, The Secret Country, and Utopia. And I highly recommend watching this for, specifically for white people, but also for black people as well, because we're learning that we're not the animals that we've been portrayed as. So that's John Pilger.
Just the last bit. This is John.
And that's John Pilger, A Secret Country. I mean, he's, I highly recommend it. Do you want me to read any of it?
If you want, yeah.
Pine Gap's primary function is the collection of data from CIA sources and transmitters in order to track and target the enemy and to prepare for nuclear warfare. According to James Jesus Angleton, Pine Gap's importance is such unlike any similar installation that may be in any other place in the free world. It elevates Australia in terms of strategic matters. This means that Australia has been positioned in the front line of a prospective nuclear war on the other side of the world, a fact underlined by numerous Soviet statements that the bases are nuclear targets. Long time. So I can't critique them.
That's alright, man.
I'll do Shakespeare. So this is it says it's the complete works of William Shakespeare, but it's not. Bit of a rip-off. But there is a book in some of my rap songs that I'm producing at the moment. I open with some of what Shakespeare has said. Now there's a couple of books in my online collection, which there's one called the Biliteral Cipher of William Shakespeare. And in that particular book, the author proclaims that William Shakespeare is a pseudonym, and that the real William Shakespeare, who we know almost nothing about, was actually Francis Bacon. And so I looked at the name, I thought, well, if that's true, William Shakespeare must be a play on words. And then I remembered the black rapper will.i.am, and then I was like, will.i.am, the spear that shakes. And the spear that shakes, of course, is the pen. And the idea behind this biliteral cipher was Francis Bacon was a genius. He had 5 different languages under his belt. When King James asked him to pushed for was to look like it was the divine right of kings. That is, King James was chosen by God to rule. Now, King James, the irony, of course, was he was a homosexual. You'll notice that we've just had $123 million on a yes vote. Most elites, kings, have been homosexual. Same with the priesthood. Yet they've always pointed the finger. So it's always an irony that people say the King James Version is the only true version, when Francis Bacon himself said, I don't trust anything that Bible says. And he was employed with 15 other intellectuals at Oxford to rewrite the Bible, and they rewrote it 13 times, at which point King James said, if you don't write it the way I want you to write it, you won't need a hat for where that head is.
Yeah, sure.
That's it. You want me to read something?
Sure. Is any of his sonnets there, or?
That's the thing. The sonnets aren't in here. So the sonnets are... let me just open a random page.
No.
Now, enter Antony Caesar, Octavia between them. The world and my great office will sometimes divide me from your bosom, Octavia. All which time before the gods my knee shall bow my praise to them for you, Antony. Good night, sir, my Octavia. Read not my blemishes in the world's report. I have not kept my square, But that to come shall all be done in the rule. Good night, dear lady. Good night, sir. Good night. Okay. So this is introduction to logic. Logic is tries to look at, well, what was how can we create a logical argument to deduce or induce a conclusion, deductive inference or inductive inference. Anyhow, the most basic one is how our traffic lights are set up. So logic is a way of what Sherlock Holmes would use. So when you do symbolic logic at university, it's great because you get all of these symbols and you have a big board. You feel like Einstein. So when you've learnt all the symbols, then you can use the symbols to deduce a particular argument or come to a particular conclusion. Logic has all kinds of flaws in it as well, because given that we're human, we are an idea of a concept. We are not the concept itself. So that's the introduction to logic, or symbolic logic.
Want to pick another book, or?
Chris Masters' Jonestown. Of course, we know that Alan Jones also happens to be a closet homosexual. And the brilliant thing about this book, the thing that I most love hearing, first off, you've got Alan Jones that's working for Murdoch. Now, it's always been the conservatives that have pointed the finger at homosexuals and used sexuality to divide and conquer, which is what I think that 123 million vote was for. It was to politicise and groom the public in having a conversation about homosexuals, which Australia never really had before, or not for a long time. Nobody cared because Mardi Gras had marketed homophobia away. But what they've done is now they're using sexuality as a political divide and conquer methodology. Now Jones is in the closet and all the conservatives have been defending him. I don't know why. But what I love about this book is a bunch of comedians, when he was driving to work, got this book, and as Jones drove under a bridge, they dropped the book onto his car and it went through his windscreen. And a bunch of comedians on the radio said, Jonesy, they said, why don't you auction off the book for a charity and autograph it? So I just got Jonestown just because of that. Mm-hmm. And just to know a bit about Alan Jones, he's got a great mind, but he's a compulsive liar. He'll use mathematics and lie on Q&A all the time just to make it look like he's somehow progressive or for something. He's a conservative. A conservative doesn't want change. That means they want white supremacy to rule. Okay, what else? So, George Orwell, 19... why don't I do this, dude? I'll get a pot and you can put it on there.
Yeah. Go for gold.
So George Orwell and Huxley, this one's 1984. I think we've all read it, or done it at school. We're in the Orwellian. One of my quotes actually on the track that I've done online for free, which is called Making a Killing, and I rap in first person Prime Minister John Howard. And at the end of the video, right at the far end, Orwell says, the point is not to finish, is not to end war, it's to maintain war. It's to have a permanent state of war, which is what America's had since the 1950s, if not before. So it's scary because we're in Orwellian speak. If you listen, but Orwellian speakers, people don't realise that the priests have used Orwellian speak for 1,000 years. They talk about saving your soul when in fact they're enslaving your soul and regressing you and saying don't do anything. So George Orwell was prophetic, but all literature in many ways is doing is distinguishing our humanity, the good side and the bad side. So we're in an Orwellian time. And people don't like it. Most people are progressive. The ones that aren't are only the 1%, and the ones that aren't progressive have probably been induced by some traumatic incident via rape or paedophilia, which causes them to live in a fear-based paradigm. So that's George Orwell, 1984. These books, you want me to I'll go through them.
You ready?
So this is Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is a real hero, real superhero. This particular book's called With Liberty and Justice for Some. And Glenn Greenwald is the chap who was in communication with Snowden when the Snowden revelations came out. Greenwald exiled himself from America to Brazil, and he's just been accused of cyber crimes by this idiot Bolsonaro, who's a compulsive liar and set the fires in the Amazon, and then said it was the left. Bolsonaro is involved in all of these killings of activists. We've just had a guy be killed in Mexico who had a reservation for the monarch butterfly. Anyway, so Glenn Greenwald has got his own show called The Intercept, a whole bunch of real investigative journalists looking at the crimes of empire. With Liberty and Justice for Some is written very well, and I always say to people, watch Glenn Greenwald if you want to learn about what's going on in the world. Keep going. So this is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, played by Jack Nicholson, and this had a good and a bad impact because people started to see how poorly people with mental health issues were being treated. However, now if you go to the States, if you go to California, there are thousands of people with mental issues on the street. So at first they went and said, this is, I think, during Reagan or pre-Reagan, I think it was Reagan actually, he said, we're going to help these people with mental issues. Now it's exponentially grown and people are living on the street. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I always remember Nurse Ratched. And I could never, I would say, is her name Ratched? And then I realised Ratched, it's probably both Ratched and Ratchet, like a spanner in the works. So I always remember watching the movie, and then I read it, and you know, Jack Nicholson was, he's just a fantastic actor. So that's Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Media monopoly by Ben Bacon is, you have to understand how this media monopoly works. Again, a bunch of white control freaks that want to brainwash their own masses into wars and lying. So they're not really giving us proper narratives, they're lying. And now we have 6 that own most of the information that we get, so they can cull and tell us lies. That's the media monopoly. Keep going. This is by a chap called Amos N. Wilson. I've got 2 of his books. One book is called Black on Black Violence in Subservience to White Supremacy, and then there's this one. And we find that black children normally can hold, when they're born, they're about 5 or 6, between 5 and 8 months more advanced for the first 8 months than white children. They can sit up, maintain eye contact, they walk. My brother learned to walk at 6 months, very, very early. So physically they're advanced. And Amos Wilson was brilliant. So he really looked at how to develop a black child inside of this system of white supremacy, so that black people understood that they're not an inferior, subhuman race which has been pushed onto my father's people for the last 500 years. This is Michael Bradley's book, which is what my rap name is based on, who looks at the prehistoric conditions for the process of colonization. A resource-scarce environment with a bunch of elites that are hoarding, branched out to steal all the resources in the guise of bringing Jesus. Bradley breaks this down. It's a white guy, but he's been accused of being racist because it dares to critique white supremacy. These are two brilliant books, Empire of Illusion, The Literacy and Triumph of Spectacular. Chris Hedges is a phenomenal author. This one's called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War on America. Now this is happening in Australia right now. Same format, same modality, same brainwashing, same lying. Hedges, you should watch everything of his and read everything you can. He's a real academic. Makes me feel like I've just learned to read. But he's incredible. I'll just read the back of this. The more we sever ourselves from a literature, print-based world, a world of complexity and nuance, a world of ideas for one informed by comforting, reasserting images, fantasies, slogans and celebration of violence, the more we implode. We ask, like the wrestling fans of those who confuse love with pornography, to be fed lies. We demand lies, the skillfully manufactured images and slogans that flood the airwaves and infect our political discourse, mask reality. We do not protest, the lonely Cassandras who speak the truth about our misguided imperial wars, the global economic meltdown, and the imminent danger of multiple populations that are destroying the ecosystem that sustains the human species, are drowned out by the arenas full of fans chanting, slut, 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 or television audiences chanting, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. The worse reality becomes, the less a beleaguered population wants to hear about it, and the more it distracts itself with squalid pseudo-events of celebrity breakdowns, gossip and trivia. These are the debauched rebels of a dying culture. Harsh. I'm going to read the back of this because it's terrifying to understand what evangelicism is, Christianity, and now our fundamentalist Christians are being groomed here. A startling and terrifying expose of political ambitions of the Christian right in America, and I would say Australia, and a clarion call for everyone who cares about freedom. They disseminate their ideas on the alternative broadcast networks through their own publishers and schools. Their intellectual leaders demand the complete dismantling of the secular state. Their followers have been roused to a fever of pitch of resentment and despair, describing themselves as true patriots. They wrap themselves in a flag, but it all might take writers, veteran journalists. Chris Hedges is one more national crisis of the order of September 11 for the Christian right to seize power and reveal themselves for what they really are, the American, Australian heirs to fascism.
Where you took off from?
Rituals hidden in the daytime. I'm an infant in the lands of holiness, shapeless till then, like a drop in water. Even in my past dialogue spoken before, there's actions I'll be demanded that I'm accounted for. It's been a miserable week. Wearing no denim clothing, nothing transcends earth. It's disturbing how we can see it all but never touch or get a sniff of its scent. I had to feign to illness in order to devote myself to my own journey entirely. Nothing else held importance, a devastating delight. The results are incredibly affecting, and if I'm blessed, the end game will translate to the remaining world. It's nice to know that humanity has not deserted me. Admitting vulnerabilities and caught between wanting to be touched and left alone. Stinge of silver lining from the bright moon that provides a glitter of diamonds over motions of broad ocean's waters. Ready to give birth to those truly sorry, pressed upon the soul of my consciousness, causing my heart to beat. As I saw so many lies, where no beauty lives. It's really intriguing, shared too often, occasionally spitting out quotes to sound more intelligent, dismissing all mosaic laws, until fantasy is escaped. The mind is peril amongst all things unknown, burdening down of self-doubt and knowing personal flaws all too intimately. Though the jealousy of anyone else does not cease, the illusion of the past is attaching freedom to it. Tempt me to stay put, never grow higher, understanding chance, marking marks and going underground. culture muses never to be found, ashamed and scared, levelling out never, vacationing in depths of my mind where I've never been, blaring glare through cigarette smoke and nothing else, forming poems with no heat, just natural passion, fine arts, talents for the arts, something I can't relinquish, as colours of the earth change, depending on the cosmos' mood, relentless of sensations, going south of Eden, going my own way, wild strawberries in summertime, aging never, naked, sun-soaking, containing new knowledge, transferring into talent, drawing attention, glistening of ancient wisdom, rigid now, coming towards your heart, the sun glinted, swapping places with the moon. Tarot cards governs all or at least our triggering points. The arts, the stuff that people derive dreams from, breathing into what I know, leaving room in the void for ones to know. Not everybody needs love in it, perhaps a flow. To what flow that flow is, you'll never know until you read it, allows its whispers to enter your heart. Evil will still reign, because I know the tragic feeling of loving someone who wants nothing to do with you. It took a bit of life to experience to see it, though what to do with all that love, with that person no longer there, backing away to create distance in hopes for clarity. Learning that one could live far better than the path chosen is out there, full of metaphysicals, determines not all is given out freely, but known. Knowing now I want to die with no regret, so I overindulge everything now, speaking freely to no cost to my personal soul, etching in the essence of humanity, creeping on you. There's no magic, just grandiose saturates the surface. While we live in modern times without chaplain, attention-seeking artists, though I started green, it became fierce knowing I could reach my final goal. As to that love is meeting that love and never touching their flesh, as the other tragedy is never meeting or knowing love at all. The single yearning has a strong bond, as here is my own secret. No matter life, I'm living. I just want to be happy. It's an obnoxious feature of the bizarre markets that sell art for cheap to casual observers, that would rather pretend that accept their own status. The perspective on forever walking on eggshells, promise of Zion, moving along with natural movements of flowing, sweeping symphonies, focusing on growing internal zen, broken lover over broken trust, telling lies to which once believed, seeing the number of the breast, it's been real and alive all this time, veiled in angel dresses to once held my hand, and I open my heart to sabotage, regret breeding bitterness, nothing to do with hand I open my heart to, nothing to do with warmth, but it's deep with its hate, changing actions to align with it. All, falling in love was child, like a wonder, just drinking with wine at the same time. I wasn't getting finer with time, as I once convinced myself I was doing. A discovery of art, aesthetic words building arbority, heaven, as the world stops only for me, so I can dig to the core, through the sparkling mist, leaving behind tales of tell generations ahead that haven't reached birth. I've been cursed and crucified by my own limitations, whether it be by conscious or physical. I don't know myself, only in the streamline of forever. Maybe I will. A warming thought of a goal in fantasy. Duty to self, at times ugly. Falling into the closed off rooms to cut myself off, then forcing myself to pretend to be happy around others that made no effort to know me. But when it's hard, strangers are the easiest to cry around. I'll more likely will never see them again. I'm afraid to face myself at times of my life. There are no flaws that I wished was never there. It is why I love so hard at times. There's a colossal desire to fulfill something higher, but stop to write, cause a voice embellishing inside, won't sit still and keeps repeating in an articulating spoken voice the mistakes I've done, that presents itself in forms, shame, and when I've gone too far, there's a difference between knowing how to love and just showing it. talk about anything. So I'm consistently looking at this European elite way of having a superhero story, and how the superhero story is a contradiction and a paradox. The superhero has to first be a victim in order to become a hero. The problem is, the hero then becomes a perpetrator of violence. So I was thinking about how, if you look at every single superhero story, from Walt Disney to Marvel to DC to all of them, there's one thing that they all have in common. They're orphans. All of them are somehow an orphan that has gone through the trauma of losing mum and dad, or just dad, or just mum. And it's really strange, because I was like, why is this so? You look at Dumbo, his mum gets killed. I remember watching it as a child, and it traumatized me. I cried all the way through the movie. Messed me up. Bambi, parents killed. Pinocchio, built like Frankenstein by some white guy. Superman, parents killed. Megamind, the new one, parents killed. Spider-Man, parents killed. Batman, parents killed. The Hulk, we never see his parents, he just leaves. Every single one of those superhero movies, I suspect, is propaganda for a child, to groom a consciousness of a reactionary modality for a warrior ethos. So one of the first places that happened is in those churches. When those priests raped children, they created a trauma. That trauma has then had the child blame themselves for being raped, and then look to white Jesus for forgiveness. So they've become a priest. Now, if they've become a priest, they're looking for redemption. The problem is, they then become celibate because they see sexuality as so perverse, and then they become what? The perpetrator of a crime. So they become the very thing that they experienced. So they're locked in a past-based trauma that recreates over and over again. So that Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the fundamentalist Christian Church are all based on rape, which is colonization. Now, if you think about what's going on towards the Catholic Church now, from the victims of rape, what happens to specifically the men that don't become priests? A lot of them go into become domestically violent, or I suspect become policemen or soldiers because they have to compensate for where they had no control. It creates a control freak, right? And if you're hiding your sexuality as well, you're hiding something that's human. But that must damage the child's psychosexuality. So if you look at what Turnbull, Morrison, Howard and Trump and Obama and Clinton have done to families and children at the borders, is they've stolen the children, like they've stolen the First Nations, and said we're doing it to help them. And then they've ended up raped in foster homes or beaten, which creates fragmentation at an individual level. And from the perspective of an elite hegemony, that damages society. So en masse, those churches and the theft of children damages society such that families and individuals cannot get their shit together. Women who are raped sometimes become sex workers or porn stars. So what I suspect is this is on purpose, because over 1,000 years of raping, and colonization is about raping the resources and seeing the planet as a woman that gets raped, And then there's children that get raped and become soldiers. This has to be the format for colonization. So the rising up of all of these victims of priest rape, sexual violence, even ex-President Nixon used to beat up his wife. White supremacy aligns with women as sin. So it's again this superhero. I am the victim of Eve. And if I'm the victim of Eve, it's her fault that I've got to deal with the pain of life. Therefore I have to rein her in and control her. And this is what European religion has done. In the guise of selling the idea of the love of Jesus and the Good Samaritan on the front, whilst going and stealing everything. So I look at all those superhero stories as a way of creating a warrior ethos in our children, so that our children compensate and want to either become spies, soldiers, or policemen, or even priests. So you see that there just seems to be a consistent thematic strand. Now, all I can do, people say that's conspiracy theory. All I can do is study the facts and the statistics and the mathematics and see if those verifiable results create harmony with the conclusion that I've come to, and thereby verify my theory. This is what I think is going on. So the children at the border in America, I suspect the psychotropic drugs they've been feeding them, the child molestation, the violence, creates abandonment issues. The child then sees itself as inferior and needs to compensate and create a substitute for where they don't feel love. And this creates sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and a warrior ethos. The capitalist, neo-fascist, white Christian model is about maintaining a power structure through the fragmentation and trauma of our family units, thereby relegating morality to the side. There is no morality. It's all about how can we decimate and use, extract and exploit and brainwash people in order to maintain the theft and therefore stay at the top of the pyramid for capitalism. So we really have to look at the intrinsic, implicit notions of how this Jesus story and all these superhero stories create an ontology, that is, a relationship to ourselves and a relationship to the planet. Because you see with characters like Madonna, the planet, if the planet's a woman, then the violence towards women is an expression of those religious dogmatic systems, from Wahhabism to Christianity, which is all conjoined to fascism and corporate conglomerates. So that's what I keep thinking about. Anything else?
No. Nothing else you want to talk about?
So I'm looking at, there's a lot of, Murdoch is pushing these conspiracy theories, and I suspect a lot of the conspiracy theories created by the right, for example, those ancient Kemetic systems, the Medu Neta, the hieroglyphics, what I can see is we have all of these conspiracy theories where you see these so-called bankers doing an interview that gets published on YouTube, where they say, oh, and you know, it's part of the Illuminati, and I went to these parties where there were sex parties, and as I got paid more money, I then became, I was going to these parties where they were raping children and sacrificing the children, right? Now I'm not saying that isn't happening, but here's the thing. The interview is based on fear. These so-called bankers from Austria or wherever they are, who have these interviews with white Christians. There's one called the Vigilant Christian. It's all, and he just, everything's a conspiracy that the devil has made so that we won't get into